Hey yo, what's up everyone? In this video, we'll be going over all the various skill sets and areas of focus within the realm of music production and ranking them from the most important to the least important. So it's an exhaustive list. I've went through all of the various skills that I can think of that are related to producing music, making music in your home studio, being a producer, all of that awesome stuff. And we're going to go through it item by item and ranking it so that you can understand what to focus on next. You can maybe self-evaluate, see where your strengths lie, see where weaknesses are, and also just get a perspective that if you're just getting started or you're feeling overwhelmed by all the different skills to focus on, you'll gain clarity as to what are the most important things to focus on, and then what are the things to maybe put on the back burner and aren't that important to focus on until a later point. So sit down, get comfortable, grab your favorite beverage because we're going to jump in and rank all of these music production skills and areas of focus in order of importance. So let's jump in. Hey yo, it's Alex from Metamind Music, and you know the drill. As always with this channel, it's my mission to help musicians such as yourself produce themselves by developing their mindset, expanding their creativity, and connecting to their inner artist in a deeper way. And in this video, we're actually going through all of the main areas of focus, all the skill sets that are tied to music production and ranking them in order. So watch this. Boom. Oh, look at that. So I went through a pretty exhaustive list of all the things I found were really important in music production, and let's chat through them and rank them in order of importance to get you the most mileage with these various skills. So I thought it would be super fun to rank all of these different areas of focus, different skill sets, and really just elaborate on them and talk about why they might be very important, why they might be not so important, or why they actually might be only important in a specific situation. So I'm super excited for this. I think it'll be super useful to help clarify what are the major focus points in music production that will actually move the needle, and then what are the other ones that are nice to haves, and then what are the things that might be actually more distractions more than anything. So let's actually dive in. No particular order. Let's just go in the reverse order that I actually made these items. All right, so let's start with number one, which is mixing. So mixing is understanding how to blend tracks together once the recording and the production phases are done. And you're going to be using tools such as EQ, compression, saturators, reverbs, delays, special effects, using your return tracks, automating all that fun stuff to really enhance the sonic impact of the song or the track that you're working on, and to make it sound professional, right? To make it sound legit. So you can put it on Spotify and it's as loud as other tracks. It has that sheen to it, that professional twinkle. Twinkle is twinkle means sparkle and twinkle at the same time. So mixing is a huge category in music production. I get a ton of questions about this every single day about how to go about mixing. And it is a very important subject, no doubt, to get your projects past the finish line, to be able to say that you're a mixing engineer, that you can produce your own music. Mixing takes a big role in that. However, I do think that mixing is also overrated. I think a lot of people hyper focus on mixing, and don't get me wrong, mixing is a very important thing, but unless you're trying to be a mixing engineer, we're talking about music producers, right? We were talking about people who want to make music. Perhaps they're artists. Perhaps they want to help other artists produce music. But the main focus of this is producing music. And while mixing is a very important part, it can be the final creative touch. It can have a huge impact on the final sound of your production. I wouldn't say it is the most important thing, because if you think about it, you can outsource mixing. You could produce a song to 85% of the way there and then just hire a mixing engineer who's a professional, and you could outsource this. So because of that, I don't think it is the most important thing. However, I do think it is very important to understand this if you want to be an all-around music producer. So let's close this. Let's find mixing. Where are we? Mixing. And where we're going to put this. I'm going to put this in the A tier. All right. I do think mixing is very important. However, it is not the most important thing. There are other things that are way more important in music production, and mixing in itself is an all-prevailing skill set, because getting a good mix requires a lot of other skills other than just pure mixing. For example, recording good source tones or selecting the right sounds or having the ability to arrange a song powerfully so that it's easier to mix. So all these things are interconnected. And I almost see mixing as an umbrella subject with many other sub-subjects that contribute to it. However, mixing in itself is an important skill set to understand and develop and master to be an all-around music producer. All right, so that's where I'm putting mixing, is in the A tier. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is sound design. And sound design is the idea of, designing your own sounds, right? Understanding synthesis, understanding waveforms, understanding how to layer sounds on top of each other, understanding how to warp audio and manipulate audio in various ways. This can kind of go into understanding certain tools, certain hardware, certain plugins, all that kind of stuff. And if you think about it, if you navigate in any of your synthesizer's presets, somebody designed all of those presets. And that would be what is the sound design skill, is designing those epic sounds, those epic patches from the ground up and really understanding that. And sound design can be extremely powerful to be able to create any sound that you can imagine. And also it can be very useful to craft a unique sound within the electronic genres or any other kind of genre if you get into really the sound design of a specific type of thing, like sound designing your guitar tone or sound designing your recordings, right? There's a lot of way to look at sound design. However, I don't know if it's the most important thing, because you can get a long way just using presets and then tweaking those presets or deconstructing presets to learn, which would be learning sound design. And to be honest, with my productions, I do some sound design, but I don't rely on sound design. So I think this is really dependent on what kind of music you're making. Because if you're like an instrumentalist like myself, you play guitar, you play drums, play bass, you're not super concerned with sound design other than shaping tones and then maybe playing with synths and designing some cool pads or finding some presets or something to work from. However, if your genre of music is heavily dependent on sound design and almost defined by sound design, then this becomes super important. It becomes part of your craft, probably the most important thing of your craft. But because of that variability, I think we're going to put it in the B category. Right? It's going to go into B because I don't think that it's that important. It can be very important depending on the circumstance, like I just said. However, you can get a long way and you can get professional sounding music and expressive music and unique music without knowing any sound design, right? There's a lot of artists who have done this. I know some sound design. I'm by no means a master of sound design, but I feel confident in my ability to make awesome music and good tracks. So that's where I'm going to put it, is B, kind of middle of the road. It can be important for sure, but it's definitely not the most important thing to narrow in on in the skill sets. All right, let's move on to the next one. Let's talk about recording. So recording is getting good source tone. So this is anything from understanding how to mic a vocal, how to record a guitar amp, how to record a drum in a room, right? A drum kit, understanding all the different microphones, miking techniques, understanding what they do and how they change the sound at the source. So this is all about getting good source tones. Instead of relying on mixing or processing them in post to make them sound good, it's really having the ear to understand how to get good quality recordings, and also the foresight to know what EQ moves you're making, basically by choosing specific mics, choosing certain recording techniques, etc. And by making those decisions ahead of time and understanding where your song is going right from the beginning is a huge part of music production. It's a huge part of understanding the sonic vision from the beginning and then using that vision to make choices as you record the various sounds, vocals, guitars, basses, piano, whatever, trumpet, anything. And understanding mics and understanding what frequency ranges and the typical approach to mic different instruments is huge for any type of recording-based production. The only caveat with this is that in the modern music production age, you can do a lot of stuff inside the box, and some people could create their productions completely inside the box. And by inside the box, I mean you're using synthesizers, you're using samples, you're chopping them up, you're manipulating them all within the computer. And you don't necessarily need a microphone to record anything. You don't need to be recording any performances. If you're simply orchestrating stuff all within your computer, then recording skills aren't that important. So again, there's a little bit of variability. However, I do think recording is extremely important to understand if you're doing anything related to audio, vocals, recording guitars, recording a board gear, whatever it is. You want to understand how to record it properly and how to get the best possible source tone before you have to get to the mixing phase. All right. So having said all that, all right, I'm going to put recording in the A tier because understanding how to record properly go hand in hand with getting a good mix, with getting solid performance. All of that stuff I would put underneath the recording umbrella is understanding how to record, how to capture really powerful sounds and how to capture really high quality performances. And I would say that contributes a huge amount to the end final product of what you're producing. So I'm putting it in the A tier. The only caveat, the only reason it's not in the S tier is because you don't always need to understand recording and you don't always need to be recording external stuff if you're kind of orchestrating or programming music or doing everything within your DAW with MIDI. Then you don't really need to know recording. However, you still have to understand how to record MIDI. So that's why it's going there. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, mindset. And this is interesting. This is definitely coming from my personal perspective on what I think is super important with music production. And mindset would be everything related to like how effective you are in showing up consistently to your studio, how you feel about your music, how confident you are about your skills, how you approach or how you perceive the reality of the music industry and your role within it, right? How well defined your big picture goals are, your dream goals, where you're headed, how much belief you have in your abilities and the potential for that to happen. And basically your overall perspective when you hit obstacles or when you hit problems, when you come across any kind of roadblock, how do you go about dealing with that and how does that affect you? Do you tend to procrastinate? Do you have self-doubt? Do you run into writer's block? Are you extremely inconsistent in showing up at the studio? Or are you a master of your mindset? Are you super upbeat and confident? Do you take care of your health? Are you super consistent? Are you creative when you come across problems? All that kind of stuff. Are you super upbeat when you meet new people and when you see new opportunities, whether it be in a track or with networking your music or your services, whatever it may be? So what's the quality of your mindset related to music production in and around it overall? And I think that mindset is 100%, I have no hesitation here, an S tier thing. Mindset is the most important, one of the most important things in anything, especially music production, because mindset prevails any skill. Anything you're trying to learn, anything you're trying to do, anything you're trying to move forward will require a certain mindset, a certain type of perspective to allow you to grow through those goals and grow through that trajectory. And if you have a horrible mindset, it doesn't really matter how skilled you are in anything, in sound design and mixing and recording and anything else we cover. If you have a poor mindset, it will prevail through all of those things. And on the flip side of that, some people don't necessarily have the most developed skill sets. They might not have like an extreme amount of skill in any of these areas. However, if they have a very powerful mindset and they persevere through anything, those people will outperform everybody. Right? Those people will actually get the result because they'll be consistently taking action, learning from their actions, trying new things. And that is the pinnacle to move forward in anything, right? So that's why I'm putting it in S tier. It is without a doubt one of the most important things in music production and in life in general. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is sound theory. And sound theory is basically understanding how sound works. Right? Understanding what compression and rarefactions are, understanding how sound waves react in an environment when it's being recorded, understanding, decibels, understanding compression, understanding EQ, the frequencies, all the different kind of principles and concepts behind how sound works and how to manipulate it. Harmonics, all of this stuff is sound theory. Acoustics, how to set up your room properly, acoustic treatment, how sound bounces off walls to create reverb, having a good listening environment with your speakers, understanding what's a dangerous level of decibels, all those kind of things, all those concepts I would group into sound theory. And this is actually what I went to school for, is really going deep into understanding sound at a fundamental level to then expand that into media, into production, recording, mixing, all that kind of stuff. So I think sound theory is very important to understand, at least at a fundamental level. If you don't understand the fundamentals of sound, generally you're going to have so many headaches and so many problems to interface with your DAW and all the plugins and the tools and how to manipulate sound and how to ultimately get the end result that you want. So I would say the fundamentals of sound theory are absolutely essential. However, some of the more advanced concepts may only apply if you're trying to set up a professional studio, trying to get optimum mixing environment, things of that nature. So with that said, I'm going to put sound theory in the A tier because the fundamentals of sound theory are absolutely essential to understand anything, to understand mixing, to understand recording, to understand sound design. You have to know some sort of sound theory. So that's why I'm putting it so high, because it is such a fundamental understanding that we have to know to move forward. All right, so let's actually go to the next one here. All right, so the next one is the DAW, the Digital Audio Workstation. This is the software in which you record external audio, you record MIDI, you actually will be mixing your tracks, you'll be editing your tracks, you'll be arranging your tracks, you'll be playing around with plugins, changing sounds. Basically, it is where everything happens in the modern music production age, is the DAW. There are so many different DAWs out there. I use Ableton, there's Cubase, there's Logic, there's Pro Tools, there's Bitwig, there's FL Studio, the list goes on and on and on. So what I mean by this category is how well do you know your DAW? How easily do you navigate it? Do you know how it works? Do you know how to record MIDI, record audio? Do you know how to edit MIDI and audio? Do you know how to play around, how to create new tracks, add layers, play around with groups? Do you know how to load up plugins? Do you know how to access like automation and all the different modes of your DAW? Is it easy for you? Do you know the hotkeys? Do you know how to get around really quickly, or do you have to menu dive and you're not sure about how things work or where everything is? So basically the knowledge of your DAW and like how much of a ninja are you at your DAW. And in the current music production age, knowing your DAW is so important because it is pretty much the hub of where everything happens. Okay, if you're recording external instruments only, if you're an instrumentalist, you need to know how to record those things and how to manipulate them afterwards in your DAW to actually create a product, to create a production. Or if you use your DAW to create everything, program MIDI, program synths, play around with layers, chop up audio, you obviously have to understand how to do all that stuff very effectively to be able to create what you want. And I would say that the DAW is the instrument of the 21st century, especially with DAWs like Ableton, where you can get these like crazy MIDI controllers and you can map it to anything. You can get creative and you can start to turn your DAW into a performance instrument. All these crazy things that we're just on the tip of the iceberg of exploring are like next level. And I think that this is absolutely paramount. Like you have to know your DAW in order to make any progress as a music producer, especially if you want to be a professional music producer and do it at a very high level. This is a must have. You must understand your DAW at a very high level. So for that reason, we're going to grab the DAW and we're going to smack it in the S tier because it is so important. You really have to understand your DAW inside and out. And the more you understand it, the deeper you know it, the more it's going to unlock your creativity in cool ways in and around your music. So DAW goes in the S tier. So let's move on to probably the most fun thing within music production, which is file management. And I almost forgot to put this in, but I think this is worth mentioning because I have lost not too many projects, but I've lost some progress on some projects because of poor organization, poor file management. So meaning backing up your recordings, backing up your projects, being well organized so that if you make any changes, you know where those changes are saved to. Or if you want to restore a previous session, you know how to do that. If you want to share your stems with somebody, if you want to save your project to somewhere else, if you want to move your project, understanding where things get recorded to, understanding where your presets are saved to, and basically having some sort of system of organization to facilitate the way that you can jump into your projects or jump back to a specific session or share something with somebody if you're collaborating. So all this stuff is not necessarily the fun stuff of music production, but I think it is pretty damn important, because if you do a lot of work and you have poor file management or organization and you lose all your work because you don't know where you saved it, or you lost your samples tied to a project, or you failed to back something up, or you failed to save a previous version that you're working on that had some magic and you deleted it, it is the worst feeling in the world. All right. So this is very important. So let's get out of here. I think it's going to go to the A tier just because the more I think about it, there are some really bad things that can happen if you have poor file management, which I've experienced a little bit of. So I would say that if you start off on a good foot and are quite organized and have like a routine to back up your work, you're just going to avoid unnecessary stress and pulling out your hair from losing stuff. So I'm going to put it up there for that. All right, so let's move on to chord progressions. All right, so this is understanding how to make basic triads, I guess your diatonic triads in scales, a little bit of music theory, but this is a specific section of music theory. I have another card that's going to be an umbrella of music theory, but this one kind of stands out itself, is understanding chord progressions and how to move from chord to chord, how they're related, how to build chords, I guess the Nashville numbering system, like the 1-4-5 or the 2-5-1 chord progressions, understanding that and being able to pick it out. That is pretty important in music in general, because most songs will have a chord progression, right? And just a very base understanding of how to build chords and how to tweak them a little bit can get you a long way in making interesting chord progressions and really getting outside of the norm. However, you don't necessarily need to know the theory behind chord progressions to find good chord progressions. For example, I'm a self-taught guitarist, and I found a plethora of amazing chord progressions that I love just by playing around without necessarily knowing what I'm doing. However, I totally understand that knowing your chords, and now I do have a better understanding of the theory of chord progressions, does help you in getting there faster and really picking it apart and seeing how you could change it a lot quicker. However, you can figure this stuff out just by ear and just by playing around with an instrument or playing around in your piano roll, whatever it may be. So I think that this is pretty important, but I don't think it's super important. I don't think it is the most important thing to focus on right away, but it is important. So we're going to put this into the B tier. All right, we're going to put it into B because I do think that having a baseline understanding of chord progressions, just the fundamentals, can be paramount, can be super useful and valuable in your music production workflow. However, you can get away with not knowing all the advanced stuff or any kind of in-depth music theory and make amazing music regardless. So I'm going to put it in the B tier. It's definitely something to consider focusing on and building your skills in. However, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the first thing you should focus on in music production. All right, let's move on to something else. Melody writing. And this is another kind of music theory concept. This is very much music production, making music kind of idea, melody writing. All right, I'm going to kind of loop in creating a hook to melody writing because a hook isn't always a melody. However, a lot of the times it is. Like a hook can be just a vibe. It can be a sound. It can be a drum beat. However, a lot of the times it'll be a melody in the vocals or in the guitar, the piano, the synth, the bass line even. And understanding how to write a good melody is knowing how to write a good hook or something that somebody else can sing back easily that gets stuck in your head. And I think this is really important because a great melody will take a song that's mediocre to it being great, because sometimes that's all you need to write a great song is a great catchy melody, something that makes sense along a chord progression. And it is super powerful to understand and break down what melody writing is and how to find your own way artistically to write melodies. And it is like a crucial part of any song for the most part, like unless you're doing like super abstract ambient music or like the craziest, most experimental, like crazy grindcore, like crazy, like Dillinger Escape Plan type stuff. Maybe you don't need melody for that, but for the most part, for the most kinds of music, there will be melody in it and it'll be a foundational part of the song. All right, so I'm going to put melody writing in the B tier because it is definitely a nice to know skill, something worth focusing on, but I definitely wouldn't say it is the most important thing to focus on by any means, but it is definitely important. So that's why it's kind of going middle of the road, because it has definite importance, but it's not the pinnacle or it's not something that all of your music production will hinge on, like your DAW knowledge, for example. So that's why it's going in the B tier. Let's keep moving. Next is sample/sound selection. So this is if you, for example, use a lot of presets or use a lot of samples in your music making, which I do this once in a while, but it's not a foundational part of my music making. And I know some people, it's a big part of what they do. It's a huge part of their sound and their workflow, their artistry. And this would be, I guess, understanding what samples go together, understanding the quality, understanding what samples go with the vision, or I guess embody the vision that you're going for with your track, and being able to select sounds that work well together off the bat is definitely an important skill. It's definitely huge because, for example, if you can select sounds that work well together off the bat, you're going to have to do a lot less work mixing because these sounds already complement each other in terms of frequency. This is a great skill to develop, no doubt. However, I don't think it's completely essential because with enough of a good ear and training and layering sounds, you can probably make any sound work together in a way that's pleasing to your ear with enough other skills. And the only caveat to that is if you pick samples that are absolutely garbage or just completely don't work together, then this is where the skills comes in. All right, so I'm going to put this in the C tier because it's not that important in my eyes, unless you're talking about finding source sounds, but that's more into recording. That's more into capturing sounds, but selecting sounds is, right, you can swap out sounds in like 2 seconds with our DAWs. And if you have a good enough ear and mixing capability, you can probably layer sounds and finesse sounds to take out the aspects that are not working well together and make the sounds work together in a way that's pleasing to you. However, I do totally acknowledge that some situations, some artists, sample and sound selection will be the top priority for their genre and the way that they make music. So I'm definitely aware of that. However, that's a very specific situation. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the C. It's one of those things that if you have all of these other skills developed to a certain level, then you can maybe start focusing on it. But it's definitely not something that I would go ahead and say is the most important thing. All right, let's keep moving. All right, drum programming. So this is if, for example, you have like a plugin like Superior Drummer or some other plugin that emulates real drum sounds and you don't have a drum kit, you're not a drummer, or you don't have the ability to record a drummer, which is a huge skill set that falls within recording, which is super important, absolutely, if you want to record live drums. So this is where drum programming would kind of come in, is being able to program interesting drum parts or realistic drum parts, like being able to think like a drummer, being able to create drum fills, create variations, some human touch, not have everything on the grid, some different velocities between your hits, all that kind of stuff can really go a long way in creating unique rhythms, unique drum parts, and giving some extra flavor to your tracks. And yeah, if you don't have a drummer or if you're not using samples or loops or anything of that nature, you're going to have to know how to program drums to bring it beyond just the complete basic level of just like the most simple drum beat that you could think of, right? To have some more depth, some more artistic creativity behind those drum parts. All right, so this is definitely an important skill, especially if you're doing a lot of MIDI stuff, if all your drums are MIDI, or even if you're chopping up samples. You have to understand kind of how to put drum beats together. However, I don't think it's the most important thing. I'm actually going to go ahead and put drum programming in the C tier because it is very important. It is important to develop and have a foundational understanding of drum programming. However, it's not as important as I would say understanding chord progressions, melody, or like basic sound design. They're kind of close. I'm just going to put it a little bit less because for the most part, unless you're making super rhythmic based music, it's not going to be as high of a priority as melody writing or chord progressions. However, like for me personally, I create a lot of rhythmic content in my music, so it's definitely one of my high skill sets. But for somebody who maybe just be starting out or wanting to expand their skills, I would say like it's one of those things. Like if you feel that drum programming and getting really cool, intricate drum parts is a huge part of what you like in music and what you want to explore in terms of production in your songs, then definitely focus on it. First, focus on it in a higher priority. However, if it's not, if drums mostly just hold down the beat for where you feel most creative as an artist in terms of chords, melodies, if you play guitar, you play piano, you play bass, if you're making like synth music, bass music, electronic music, typically the drums will fall in to a kind of a specific type of formula or pattern that will be typical for your genre. So it's like one of those things. It really depends, but I'm going to put it in the C just for now and to make a decision and to move forward, right? And drum programming can also involve finger drumming. I would kind of put that together. So if you really want to get into finger drumming and playing drums live on pads and like playing around with it and creating rhythms live, then this would be definitely a higher priority for you, right? So it really depends what genre you're focused in, what your goals are, what your strengths are, what your interests lie, and maybe where your weaknesses are. Like if you really have trouble with drums and all your drum parts sound boring, then maybe you want to focus on drum programming. Same with chord progressions. If you find your chord progressions or your melodies are kind of stale, kind of like then maybe focus on developing those skills to make them more interesting. So let's move on to the next one here, vocals plus lyrics. All right. And I'm going to bring these all together of being able to sing or produce vocals and write lyrics. And me personally, I am not a strong vocalist by any means. I do enjoy dabbling in writing lyrics, but I'm not a professional lyricist by any stretch of the imagination. However, I totally understand, and even from a listener's perspective, that vocals are a huge part of any song that isn't an instrumental. All right. So if we're talking about non-instrumental music, vocals are typically the center of focus. It is the most important thing in the song, and everything else is kind of supporting that vocal delivery for a lot of different genres, except for instrumental music where there's no vocals, no lyrics. And lyrics can be tremendously impactful. They can communicate messages in such a deep way because we connect to the human voice, to the sound of vocals, and words are powerful, right? Words are powerful. So vocals, if you have the ability to record vocals, to sing vocals, to write your own lyrics, I would say that this is right up there. Like this is a huge skill if you have it in you. It's still something that I haven't really developed too much, but I acknowledge the immense importance of this. The only caveat is that if you're doing instrumental music, or if you're only sampling vocals in your music, then you don't really need to be able to sing or come up with lyrics because you're using samples, right? So I think that this is very important, but it's very dependent on if you feel that you are drawn to be a vocalist and if your music is instrumental or not. And I would put this, this is a tough one. All right, I'm just going to put this, I want to put this in A, but I'm going to go ahead and put this in B from a production perspective. All right. If we're thinking from a listener's perspective, I would say that vocals and lyrics are probably S tier, right? Because most people connect to the vocals and the lyrics probably the most, and it is so important. However, if you're a music producer and you're not a vocalist, you're not a lyricist, then it's definitely not a huge priority. However, you have to keep in mind that it is a massively important thing to understand, even if it isn't you necessarily performing the vocals. So if you're working with other vocalists, stuff like that, you have to understand that vocals and lyrics are immensely impactful. But to develop the skills of vocals and writing lyrics, it really depends. So that's a tough one. That's a very light B. I might want to put that in A, but we're just going to leave it in B for now so we can keep moving forward. All right, so let's move to arrangement and songwriting. All right, so this is being able to compose a track that is infectious, that keeps the listener engaged, that tells a story, that creates an impact, that weaves in tension and release into your song, that says something meaningful, that moves the listener. All of these things come from songwriting and arrangement. And I would say that this is definitely the pinnacle that nobody talks about. Arrangement and songwriting is probably the absolute most important thing behind music production, right? If we zoom out and ignore all the technical details of mixing and understanding EQ and compression and sound design and layering sounds and like tripping out your productions and doing all these crazy edits and getting efficient workflow and all this stuff. But if you don't have the foundational skill of arranging a good song and impacting people with original, unique songwriting that actually communicates effectively and takes people through an experience of tension and release effectively, then it's all for nothing. It is all for nothing. So I would say this is the top. This is absolute at the top. If you like, everything is dependent on arrangement and songwriting. So I'm putting this in S, right? If we break this down, the quality of your mix, how well you'll be able to mix a track is going to be heavily dependent on the arrangement and the songwriting, right? The sound theory that you're learning, all of the ins and outs of the sound will all be serving a good arrangement and songwriting, right? Same with sound design, chord progressions, melody writing, vocals, lyrics, drum programming. All of these skills are good to have in and of themselves, but if they're not serving a really powerful song and a really powerful arrangement, then it doesn't really matter. So that's why it has to be at the top. I would say that is definitely something you want to focus on at the beginning of your journey, or if it's something that you feel is a weakness for you, definitely focus on it. If you feel your music isn't unique enough or you're not finishing enough music, it's probably because you need to practice arranging songs and being able to extend ideas, change ideas, create hooks, bring people on a journey. So it's definitely at the top S tier. It's amongst the most important things you can do in music production, hands down. So let's keep moving on. Instrumentation. So this is being able to play an instrument, right? So typically it'll be a chordal instrument such as piano, keys, or a guitar, or something like super unique like the Push 2 that can play chords. Anything that can play chords will be a handy companion to arrange a song. So all of these things like melody writing, chord progressions, coming up with a really cool arrangement and composition, songwriting are a lot easier to attain if you're proficient enough in a chordal instrument such as piano, keys, Push 2, some sort of MIDI controller, whatever it is. But being able to play something is super important and super powerful, right? Rather than relying on the piano roll and clicking in notes or always relying on samples or MIDI packs or whatever. If you can just play that stuff and understand it on an instrument, you're going to be well on your way. You're going to be way ahead of somebody who can't do this. And I'm not saying that you have to be a shredder or like absolute virtuoso at an instrument. I just mean basics. I just mean like you can play a chord progression and a melody on an instrument, and just instead of having to tediously program it in, you can just play it, or you can just tweak it. You can play different voicing. You can play around with modulating chords, whatever it is, playing different scales, all that kind of stuff is super important. And I will also say, if you do play an instrument, if you play trumpet, saxophone, if you're a vocalist, bassist, guitarist, pianist, any instrument, you're a drummer, really accentuating the fact that you are proficient at an instrument in your productions is going to make you that much more unique and stand out that much more, and just bring the level of your music way up, rather than just relying on programming everything in, or not even being familiar with expressing yourself through an instrument. And an instrument can also be a MIDI controller, right? And touching synths and touching sound things and sound devices like an Ableton or whatever it is. That can be an instrument as well. And just decking out a MIDI controller to perform through, I would say that is instrumentation. And with all of that said, I think that this is super important. I think that this is almost at the top, if not at the top. And with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and put instrumentation right at the top, just because, well, I'm obviously biased because I play instruments, but I am totally convinced that having a basic understanding of how to play various instruments, or at least one instrument, will tremendously help you arrange songs, which is also one of the top most important things. But it's also going to put some humanness and some more of you in the music rather than programming everything. I'm a huge proponent of that, huge advocate of that. So that's why I'm putting at the top. If you can just get a basic understanding of how to play basic stuff on a keyboard, MIDI controller, guitar, whatever you're attracted to, you're going to be miles ahead. It's a skill well worth developing, absolutely. So I'm going to put that at the top. All right, let's keep moving forward. Editing. All right, so editing would be the very much programmy stuff, the getting in the nitty-gritty of the DAW, changing the sounds of your synths, editing audio, crossfading audio, being able to hear and listen to any rhythmic anomalies or like harmonic dissonances that don't fit your ear, and being able to edit that, being able to layer sounds, basically like editing your final arrangement so that it becomes that professional quality. So it becomes kind of like surreal, that kind of professional shimmer that has all of those nitty-gritty details in it, right? This is being super attentive to detail and really putting in the extra work to make something that much more amazing rather than just good, right? So editing is, it's a pretty tedious task. I'm not a huge fan of editing. Like, I find it kind of a chore. However, I do understand that it's super important, and it can make your song that much more impactful. And for example, like if I'm playing around like a synth or something, and I only have so much playing ability with keys and synths, right? I'm much more of a guitarist. And if I wanted to create a synth sequence that is way above my playing ability, well, that's going to rely on my editing capabilities, right? My programming capabilities. So I do think editing is very important. And another way to look at editing is like, it is the final phase before you call a song done, right? Before you move on to the mixing phase and trying to get your mix to sound amazing, your song to sound amazing. It is the last touch before you complete something, the attention to detail. All right, it is very, very important. And I'm going to go ahead and put editing in the A tier, because understanding editing and understanding how to create a really high caliber track with the attention to detail and understanding the details is going to bring your productions from, like I said, just being pretty good, being good, to being phenomenal, to being great, to being professional. Editing has a huge part to play in that. I would say it's just as important as mixing, for sure. So let's keep moving forward. All right, next is mastering. All right, this is the final phase of the production process. This is the final touch, making sure that your track as loud as other tracks that are on Spotify, that they're comparable in quality to other reference tracks in your genre, other artists that you think that it's comparable to. making sure that it translates well on like phone speakers, laptop speakers, your studio monitors, your headphones, your car test, all of these various things. And mastering is a fine art, right? And it's very technical, very much reliant on understanding frequencies and stereo imaging, and really comparing all of your frequencies to each other, making sure that there's no like brash, harsh quality to your final mix. And like anything, it's really dependent on the previous phase in the process. Like, right, you can only get a great master from a good mix, and you can only get a great mix from a good arrangement, and you can only get a great arrangement from good performance and instrumentation and ideas, right? So they all feed into each other, so they all stack. However, I do think mastering isn't as important as mixing from a production perspective, unless you're a mastering engineer, obviously, right? But it is important to know to be able to finish your own tracks, get them on Spotify, get them wherever, share your stuff so that it is at a professional quality and it stands up against everything else. However, it's not like the most important thing to develop in the nitty gritty, unless, like I said, you want to become a mastering engineer. And to be honest, like, to get a really good master done is going to really be highly dependent on the quality of your mix and of your listening environment and your ears, how well your ears are tuned to be able to master in the first place. So it's something that's definitely worth looking into if it interests you. However, you could always just hire a mastering engineer that's a professional, and they'll do a great job as well. So it's a cool thing to know, but I definitely don't think it's super important, since you can outsource it, and like the amount of work ideally that you would want to do in a master is very minimal if you have a great mix. So I'd say mixing is definitely more important. And I'm going to go ahead and throw mastering down here in the D, because like I said, like you can get somebody to master your tracks for relatively small amount of investment. And it's kind of one of those niche things, right? Like if you really want to get into mastering and really get into nitty gritty of it, great. Otherwise, like just having a basic understanding of mastering and the core principles will get you to where you need to go. So I'm actually going to put mastering down there, unless of course you're interested, but that's where we're going to put it. So let's move on. All right, so let's move on to music theory, right? This is more of the overarching idea of music theory. So like understanding notes, understanding intervals, chords, how they're built, scales, how they work together, functional harmony, cadences, voice leading, all of this kind of stuff, right? Like understanding chord progressions, understanding modulation, understanding how many sharps and flats are in various keys, all this kind of stuff, understanding the music theory behind your genre, how to make chords, how to invert chords, how to voice them differently, all this stuff, how things work together. It's an endless world, which is endlessly fascinating to me. I love music theory. It's such a cool thing to learn, and there's a lot to learn, and no doubt that learning music theory will enhance your music, contrary to what some people might think, that music theory will steal away your creativity or steal away your natural inclination. I think that's just fear speaking. And I was in this camp for a little bit, but I was always interested in music theory. I never thought it was like this unnecessary thing that just steals creativity away. If anything, it will enhance your creativity, enhance your understanding, enhance your ability to communicate ideas with other people, and even analyze your own work and maybe see how you could make it better from a theoretical perspective, or even break down what you tend to do and what you tend to figure out by ear, and just having a better, thorough understanding. So music theory is definitely important for music production. And there's no end to learning music theory, right? The basics are important, and I've almost already kind of described the basics with chord progressions and melody writing. I would say that is the basics of harmony and understanding it, but you can definitely go a lot deeper with music theory to enhance your skills. But I don't think that music theory is necessarily the answer to move you forward in progress. It is definitely a helpful tool. It is definitely a powerful tool if you really go deep into it. It can really make your music stand out. However, I'm going to put it in the C category, because I think music theory is definitely important, and I encourage you that if you're interested, definitely focus on it, right? Like all of these things, this is just one opinion, and it's just my opinion right now. It would probably change day by day. However, if there's any of these things that you notice that you are super drawn to learn more about and you're really interested in, great. I definitely encourage you to continue. However, if you're thinking of focusing on music theory, but you don't have your mindset, your DAW, your arrangements, your instrumentation down, if you don't have the S tier stuff, definitely don't even worry about music theory, because it's just a distraction at that point, right? That's kind of how I'm looking at these things, is like the skills at the top are definitely the most important things you'll want to develop before these lower tier things. And these lower tier things are a little bit, they adapt depending on your interests, your style, your goals. Absolutely. All right, so let's keep moving. Workflow. All right, so when I talk about workflow, I don't mean like keyboard shortcuts or like productivity hacks and like setting timers and all that stuff. That's going to be a different thing. What I mean by workflow is the flow that your work takes to progress from step to step. So the phases that you approach your work in, meaning that like first you're going to be generating ideas, right? Then you're going to probably want to pick your best ideas, then arrange a song, then edit your song, then maybe mix it, then master it, then release it, etc. Like how do you approach the workflow, and how do you go about focusing your creativity in different parts of the process throughout music production? And that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about workflow. And I think this is absolutely paramount. Absolutely paramount. And I have to say that aside from mindset and songwriting and arrangement, that workflow is definitely the sneaky thing that is actually holding a lot of people back, but they don't realize it, because a lot of people will come to me asking about mixing advice, asking about arrangement stuff, asking about sound design, right? Asking about how to finish more music. And all of those questions point towards this skill, right? Because a lot of the time, if somebody asks me about mixing or sound design or something of that nature, how to get a pro sound, I'll ask them first, I'll be like, well, how many songs have you arranged? How many songs do you have finalized before you get into mixing questions? And the answer is very surprising, is that a lot of the times people have not completed many arrangements at all, if any, and they're worried about mixing. Right. And that's the problem that I see with so many people. Right. Another way to look at this is people ask me, how do you go about arranging a song or composing or songwriting? And it's a very valid thing and something you definitely want to focus on. But I ask them, well, how many ideas have you created? How many different things have you tried? How many different things have you played around with in trying to come up with ideas for this arrangement that you have? Because, for example, if you have like 3 ideas or you only have an 8-bar loop, you're not ready to arrange a song, right? Like you're not at that level yet. You'd be much better off just copying that loop to 16 to 32 to 64, cutting things out, and then trying to piece together an arrangement like that. But I'm always a proponent of, you want to have a ton of ideas before trying to think about arranging a song. So all that to say is that the way you approach your workflow, the way that you approach your project, is absolutely one of the most important things to do when producing music, right? Like there's no sense in worrying about mixing your snare or your snare EQ when you haven't even finalized your arrangement, right? So because of that, I'm going to go ahead and throw workflow in the S tier. Getting a good understanding of the whole process of production, from generating ideas, right, to arranging ideas, to pre-production, to re-recording, to arrangement, to layering, to editing, to mixing, to mastering, understanding the whole process and the different creative focuses you have throughout those different steps, and like when to go back to a previous step when you don't have enough for the step that you're at. All that stuff is so important. It's what I teach a lot of. So that's what I'm putting at the top for sure. Let's keep moving. All right, so next let's talk about work ethic. And this is what I mean by, I guess, productivity hacks, like setting timers, having a super well-defined goal, getting over your bullshit, so to speak, so that you actually get the work done. You actually take action instead of trying to learn more information. You're actually applying the information to create knowledge from your own experience and actually making forward progress. This is setting deadlines, right? Like setting limitations to how much time you're going to spend on certain rabbit holes, on certain tasks. prioritizing yourself, having a task system, all of this stuff in and around your music. And I got to say that this is really tough for a lot of musicians and artists in general, is to have a really solid work ethic, consistent approach to moving forward with their craft. Because a lot of artists and musicians, and I've been guilty of this for a long time, is they wait for inspiration. They're like, I'm not going to work on music unless I'm inspired. Unless something moves me to want to do it, then it's not going to feel natural. And they kind of romanticize the process. And don't get me wrong, inspiration, you should absolutely follow it when you have it. 100%. Like, always follow your inspiration, because those moments are fleeting and they get you into flow state and typically yields some amazing ideas. However, you cannot rely upon inspiration. You can't rely upon anything that wanes up and down freely, because you'll never get consistent progress, right? What you're going to rely upon is what we're talking about, work ethic, your ability to keep showing up, even if it's just 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes a day, whatever you can do. If you show up consistently every day, whether if you're inspired or not, whether you feel like garbage or not, whatever the state is, you show up and you have a plan and you try your best to stick to your plan. Because when you break down a huge, big vision goal into smaller steps, and then you tackle those steps in tiny little actions that you can take every day, you will reach your goals. It is inevitable, right? There's nothing that's going to stand in your way except for your work ethic, right? If you have a poor work ethic, if you're very inconsistent, you don't show up, you like are very intense for 2 weeks, then you fall off the map. You just pop up a session and do like whatever. You just do whatever you think in the moment is important, and you just go down rabbit holes. That's a poor work ethic. So I would definitely say that work ethic is S tier. It's definitely the most important thing to actually get progress done, right? To actually move forward. All right, let's keep moving. Next is gear. And I don't necessarily mean having gear, like having the required gear to do what you need to do. All right, because to be real, all you need is a laptop, some headphones, maybe an audio interface or a sound card. And you can get free software and you can get started and you can develop a ton of skills. You can make massive progress just with the foundations, just with the bare bone minimum amount of gear. So I'm not talking about needing senseless gear, although gear is fun. You don't need any professional gear to make amazing music. That is a myth, absolutely. What I mean by gear here is understanding your gear at a very basic level. So understanding how to use your audio interface, right? Understanding how to use your headphones or your microphone, right? Just super basic stuff. And the fundamentals are super important, and they can be very important if you're running massive sessions in a studio. Then you definitely do need to know how to use Pro Tools and use a massive mixing board, mixing console, and understand routing, right? Understand ins and outs and all that kind of stuff. It is very important in certain circumstances. And the fundamentals are very, very important. So I'm going to put this to the B tier. And keep in mind, again, this is not having gear. This is not acquiring gear. This is understanding gear, understanding how to use the basic gear that you need to get what you need done is definitely very important. But it's just a fundamental understanding, which you could realistically, you could learn this in a day or two. So that's why it's going in the B tier. Let's keep moving forward. All right, we're almost there. Next is ear training, all right? And there's a couple different ear trainings that we could think of. There's ear training in terms of music theory and being able to hear different chords, different scales, different vibes, and be able to basically understand what it is right away, or the relationship to what you're doing. Like basically, for example, hearing a song and being like, oh, okay, if this is in this key, it's a 4-5-6-1 progression. And that would be like training your ear. Or also being able to hear intervals. That would be the more so music theory side of seeing things. The other ear training that I'm talking about is ear training in terms of mixing, right? Understanding frequencies and learning what those different frequency ranges sound like, where the most common problem areas are in terms of mixing, where a lot of instruments tend to like to live in the frequency range. How to tell if you might need more saturation, more harmonics, if you're getting any masking, anything of that nature, I would put into ear training. And this is quite important once you get quite advanced in mixing. I would say that it's a definite skill that you develop the more and more that you practice mixing and recording source tones and EQing stuff and getting experience with different instruments, stuff of that nature. It is quite important, but I don't think it's necessarily essential in the beginning. However, if you're finding yourself having difficulty arranging tracks, finding cool chord progressions, mixing stuff, if you're always having masking and nothing sounds clear, then maybe you should focus on training your ear a little bit more in terms of frequency, so you can just intuitively fix those problems. So I'm going to put that in the C tier because it's one of those nice to have things, and it's definitely important, but it's definitely like a later skill that you develop after the foundational skills of like mixing, of sound theory, of recording good source tones, knowing chord progressions. And then after that, you might want to start training your ear in terms of sonics. I'm not talking in terms of like music theory. So that's where I'm going to put that thing. And I think with all that said, that we have covered the vast majority of skills that you will see inside music production. And a lot of what I think is important is the songwriting itself, right? Like the actual quality of how you bring the listener on a journey in your songwriting process. Learning an instrument goes in tandem with that. Your workflow and your work ethic will lead you to actually developing knowledge through your direct experience of the information you learn, because I've fallen into this trap many times. You can learn a ton of information. You can watch tutorials and learn and read stuff, but until you actually put it in action and see how it works or doesn't work for you, you're not gaining knowledge. You're not gaining that experience. You're just gaining information. And that's why I put workflow and work ethic right at the top, along with mindset, is that is the bottleneck for everything, is how much action you take and how much you apply the information you're learning to create knowledge. And that knowledge that you gain comes through experience, right? And then understanding your DAW and having a good creative mindset on your craft and on your goals and your beliefs about your goals and how you see your role as an artist in life and what your music means to you in terms of mindset are all absolutely must-have, most important things, in my opinion. And then all of the other categories, as you've seen and as we've gone through them, I think are lower. Hey, if you're just getting started with music production and feeling just completely overwhelmed by all these different skills that you want to develop, or if you're having trouble finishing tracks, finishing projects because you're lacking a fundamental understanding in one of these skills that we went over, or hey, if you just want to get a glimpse inside my workflow techniques and the way that I approach things, well, I created a super easy to follow 7-step framework that walks you through a lot of the skills we talked about and when to approach them inside of production. So it goes from generating your ideas to picking the best ones to then arranging them, editing them, mixing, mastering, and I've baked in a bunch of my best tips that I learned over the years into an easy to follow guide, and it's super handy to have as a printout in your studio. So if you're interested in grabbing that, there's a link for it in the description below. And that wraps it up for this video. So let me know, did I miss anything crucial in terms of skill sets around music production? I'd love to know your opinion. And did I organize them in a way that makes sense to you? Or do you have a different way you'd organize it? I'd love to know what you think about what are the most important things to focus on in terms of music production, and what are the things that can take the back burner or are nice to haves or very circumstance dependent. I'd love to know your opinion, so drop a comment down below. If you found value in this video, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe if you'd like to stay in the loop for future MetaMind Music video transmissions. And with that, we will leave you, talk to you later, and we'll see you in the next video.